The Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is today holding urgent talks with US President Donald Trump in a bid to secure an exemption from sweeping tariffs on steel and aluminium. Donald Trump has announced he intends to slap blanket tariffs of up to 25% on steel and aluminium imports.
The move could affect around $1 billion of Australian exports, but even if Australia gets its way, there are fears a trade war between China and the US could still have consequences for our economy. Let's go to our political reporter Pablo Vinales in Canberra, and also for this, let's go to our North America correspondent Carrington Clark. Carrington, to you first. The President's about to speak. Have we heard from him yet, and what can we expect to hear? Any more detail on this announcement?
Yeah, good morning, Bridget. We are waiting for the President to speak and to sign this executive order. We've got about an hour and a half now to wait. It was pushed back, and there are many world leaders nervously waiting to see the detail on this particular tariff. Whether or not, as the President has said, this will be imposed on all countries equally, or whether or not there is room for negotiation. Now, this tariff would effectively push up the price of those imports of steel and aluminium into the United States. It's a tax on imports. It's paid by consumers or other companies who are buying those ingredients for their own production. So it is borne by Americans, but the worry for other countries is because it forces up the cost of what they're exporting. It means it's less likely Americans will be buying those products, which obviously leads to lower economic performance in those countries. We have already heard from the Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz. He says if this is imposed, then they will have nothing. They will have to retaliate with their own tariffs. The Mexican President, Claudia Sheinbaum, says she is waiting to see the details of these tariffs before deciding what the appropriate response is. She has some recent experience in dealing with Donald Trump when it comes to the threat of tariffs. Donald Trump said he was going to be imposing tariffs on both Canada and Mexico. In retaliation, he said, to the movement of migrants and illegal drugs into the United States from those countries. He said there was nothing they could do to avoid those tariffs, but then there was a last-minute deal that was struck, giving a 30-day reprieve. We wait to see whether or not, yet again, this is an attempt at leverage by the US President, or whether or not he is going to impose them, as he did when it came to China with the 10% tariff that's recently been imposed on top of the tariffs that were already in place. Australia does have advocates over here in the United States saying that we should be exempt. One of the best friends of Australia here in the United States in the halls of power is a congressman by the name of Joe Courtney. He says Australia should be exempt in part because of the close military relationship between the two countries.
What we're seeing is a completely needless, almost insult to the people of Australia by raising tariffs of Australian products coming into this country. At the same time, we are working with them, and they are buying 3 nuclear submarines, cash on the barrelhead, full price, no gimmies, no giveaway.
Australia will be pleased to hear those voices being raised in its defence, but the Prime Minister will be able to make his own argument directly to the President a little later.
All right, thanks very much, Carrington. Pablo, when can we expect the Prime Minister to speak to the President? We understand that call is imminent. We're just waiting on some details.
Yeah, Bridget, good morning. The Prime Minister confirming that phone call was scheduled. He said that in Parliament yesterday. The government has since confirmed, actually, that the phone call was scheduled before Donald Trump made this announcement of imposing tariffs. We don't have an exact time yet, though we do expect it to be later today. And it will be the first phone call between Anthony Albanese and Donald Trump since Anthony Albanese congratulated Mr Trump following his election victory last year, and you can imagine that the Prime Minister will be putting Australia's case forward to be made exempt for some kind of carve-out for Australia on these tariffs. Australia does have a free trade agreement with the United States. It has been in place for the last 20 years, and certainly the case that the Australian government has been making both privately, and again you can expect that to be made behind closed doors as well, is that the US runs a large trade surplus with Australia. which basically means we buy a lot more from the US than the US purchases from us. And that is what Labor frontbencher Mark Butler was saying earlier this morning.
It's important, the timing is excellent, so that the PM can have the case to make strongly to the US President that there should be an exemption on Australian exports. We know that steel and aluminium exports into the US market feed directly into their supply chain. They're good for American jobs. It's a case we've made in the past to the US administration, and the PM, I can assure your viewers, will be making that case very strongly sometime today again.
This was a similar case that was made in the Trump administration in 2018 when Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister then. He was able to secure a carve-out for Australia alongside other countries. Now, we've also heard from the opposition this morning who say that this is now a test for the Prime Minister and Australia's ambassador to the United States, Kevin Rudd, who is working on the diplomatic effort to try and ensure Australia is exempt from these tariffs, though we should know that when that exemption was given in 2018, it did take some time for the government then to secure that deal. So certainly whether there will be any outcome today is very unclear, but that diplomatic case will be put forward strongly, Bridget.
All right, thanks very much. Pablo, and to you, Carrington, in Washington.
Now, there's a lot going on this morning. In a moment, we're going to give you some finance news and we'll head to New South Wales to get the latest on those storms that have been hitting the state. But first, let's go over to Charles, who has the latest headlines.
Thank you, James. A woman has died in a house fire in Melbourne's outer west overnight. Emergency services were called to the blaze at a property in Currajong shortly after 3 a.m. Police are not treating the fire as suspicious at this stage. Increased access to free GP visits for people under 35 is just one of a raft of changes being championed by Australian doctors ahead of the federal election. The plan by the Royal Australian College of GPs also recommends lifting bulk billing rates, slashing out-of-pocket costs and training more doctors. Australia's bulk billing incentive currently only applies to under 16s and concession card holders. The flood emergency continues in North Queensland as some residents mark 10 days straight without power. But in some good news for the region, a key bridge connecting Townsville and Ingham has reopened for freight vehicles, and the Weather Bureau expects rain should begin to ease from tomorrow. Former ABC Chair Ita Butrose is expected to take the stand today in journalist Antoinette Lattouf's unlawful termination case against the national broadcaster. Ms Lattouf claims she was unfairly sacked after sharing a social media post about the conflict in Gaza. The ABC denies Ms Lattouf was unlawfully terminated. The matter is being heard in the federal court with 5 witnesses yet to take the stand, including Ms Butrose. Indian police have quite literally pulled the plug on an Ed Sheeran street performance while he was attempting to serenade locals. The English singer-songwriter is touring India and took time out between concerts to do some busking in the city of Bengaluru. Local police weren't moved by the 4-time Grammy winner's rendition of The Shape of You, saying he lacked the proper permit for the performance. But the singer has taken to Instagram saying that he did have the proper permit.